So, have you ever wondered why China can throw up entire cities and massive rail networks in what feels like the blink of an eye, while in the US it can take that long just to get a project approved? It's a huge question. Today, we're going to dive into the radically different paths these two superpowers are on, all based on Dan Wang's incredible book, Breakneck.
Okay, to really get a feel for this, let's just rewind the clock to 2008. Picture this. In the very same year, two enormous high-speed rail projects get the green light. Both are about 800 miles long. One's in California, meant to connect San Francisco to LA. The other is in China, linking Beijing and Shanghai. Same year, same basic idea, but the outcome? Well, it's a whole different story.
Get this, China's line was up and running just 3 years later, in 2011, and for way, way less money. And the impact? It's just staggering. In its first decade, it carried 1.35 billion people. That's not a typo. Meanwhile, back in California, well, they've managed to build a small piece of the track in the Central Valley.
So this is the heart of it, right? This is the central mystery that Dan Wang tries to solve. How is this even possible? How can the world's two biggest economies be on such completely different clocks? What's going on here? Well, Wang offers up this really powerful way of looking at it. And it's not the old story of capitalism versus socialism. No, he says it's about something much more fundamental: who's in charge and what they care about. He calls it a battle between the engineering state and the lawyerly society. All right, so what in the world is the engineering state? Just think about China. It's a system run by people who, actually build stuff. When Xi Jinping started his third term, he didn't fill the top spots with political theorists. He packed the room with scientists, engineers, and guys who ran the country's biggest defense companies. Their number one goal is building up the nation's power, and their method is total top-down control.
And the lawyerly society? Yep, that's the United States. It's a system where the process, the legal rules, are everything. Now look, this started for a really good reason back in the 60s, to hold power accountable. But over time, it's kind of morphed into this tangled web of procedures and a fear of taking risks that just brings everything to a grinding halt. It means for almost any big project you can think of, it's just way, way easier to stop it than it is to actually build it.
Wang has this quote that just nails it. He says that in this new era of competition, the United States brought lawyers to a technology fight. And what did China do? They brought engineers. I mean, when you put it that way, it says everything, doesn't it? It shows you exactly what each country values most. So this whole idea of an engineering state can sound a bit academic, a little abstract. But Wang has this amazing personal story that makes it all incredibly real. He literally takes us on a 400-mile bike ride, right into the heart of it. He basically says, look, to really wrap your head around China's transformation, you can't just read reports. You have to see it, to feel it. So that's exactly what he and two friends did. They decided to cycle across Guizhou, which, historically, was one of the poorest, most cut-off provinces in the whole country. And what they found on that ride was just mind-blowing. They're cruising down these pristine, empty highways that weren't even open to cars yet. They're crossing these spectacular bridges that soar over impossibly deep gorges, and they end up in Chengqing, a mega city he describes as hydropunk, something straight out of a sci-fi movie like Blade Runner. A journey like this simply wouldn't have been possible a few years earlier. But here's where it gets really complicated. Wang didn't just see the marvels. He saw what he calls the madness sitting right next to it. I mean, on one hand, it's incredible. You've got this poor, remote place that's suddenly connected to the world, basically squeezing a century of development into just 2 decades. But on the other hand, you see the cracks. Crippling debt, bizarre vanity projects like ski resorts in the subtropics, and villages that feel like ghost towns because all the young people had to leave to find work. And that brings us to the really difficult part of this story, the dark side of the engineering state. Because when you move this fast, when you have this much centralized power, it comes at a price, a steep and often tragic human cost. And there's maybe no better example of this than the one-child policy. Wang tells this absolutely chilling story of a campaign in 1991 that was officially known as the Slaughter of the Lambs. I mean, the name alone. It was a 100-day blitz of forced abortions and sterilizations, all to meet government quotas. The scale of this kind of social engineering is just hard to comprehend. By 1999, over a third,
35% of all married women of reproductive age in China had been sterilized, so often against their will. It's like the state viewed its own citizens not as people, but as variables in a giant national equation that needed to be optimized.
And this kind of recklessness, this disregard for the individual, it shows up again and again. It's a mindset that values speed above all else. It's what gives you tofu houses, shoddily built schools that just crumble in an earthquake, killing thousands of kids. It's what sees millions of people as obstacles to be cleared from massive dam. And it's what sees art, comedy, and free thought as threats to be stamped out to maintain control. The human cost has just been profound.
So, where does all this leave us? We're looking at two completely different models. One can build wonders, but at a terrible human cost. The other protects individual rights, but seems to have forgotten how to build at all. It begs the question, what happens now? Is there any way for them to learn from each other?
Now, Wang doesn't pretend to have some easy answer, but he does offer a sense of hope. His hope is that China can somehow learn to value its people and protect them with real laws without losing its ability to get things done, and that the U.S. can rediscover its ambition, its capability to build big things again, but without sacrificing the values that make it what it is.
And he leaves us with this one last, really provocative thought to chew on. China, even with all its wealth and power, still officially calls itself a developing country. Why? To stay hungry. To maintain that sense of urgency. So Wang asks, what if America did the same? What could we accomplish if the U.S. decided to act like a developing nation again, with that same fire, that same drive to get unstuck and build a better future?